thanks to my Ko-fi supporters that make these videos possible. You can also get a deck review on my weekly Tuesday and Sunday streams. It's the best way to support the channel.
Hello everyone! So I've been doing deck reviews for a while now. In fact, we've just reached 848 deck reviews done on stream. And as with anything that's been carried on this long, there has been some certain trends that have popped up. To me, these are Elk staples, almost. Cards that I recommend for a wide swath of decks that I feel are still kind of just underappreciated in the greater scheme of things. If you're a regular veteran Elk viewer, you'll probably be able to guess most of the cards on this list. But if you're not, hey, here's some free deck upgrade material. I kind of want to talk about these cards in context as well, talk about where they shine the best, what lists they enhance the most. And in general, it's going to be pretty budget. I think the most expensive card on this list is somewhere in the ballpark of $12. And that's an outlier. So most of these cards are going to be well within the like $5 range to procure and put in your lists.
Before we get into the video though, I first need to thank this video's sponsor, FlexiSpot. FlexiSpot are the creators of truly great standing desks. The one I have behind me here is actually their E7L model, which is an L desk. Personally, I can't live without an L desk. Having enough desktop space for my computer, as well as for organizing and sorting and playtesting with Magic cards, is vital. Although FlexiSpot is very easy to adjust to your preferred liking, you are also able to set presets, like say for instance, your preferred standing height. I'm gonna move the desk up a little bit. There we go. My old desk, I used to push and pull my rolling chair, and I would move the desk. Here, I don't think I could move this even if I wanted to. Literally, it doesn't budge. FlexiSpot desks come with a 15-year warranty, so you know that this investment comes with a bit of security. It's also super important to mention that standing desks like this are actually better for your health. As someone who struggles with back pain because of scoliosis and whatever, being able to stand up for a bit and not just sit down all day is actually super important. Thank you so much FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. You can get your FlexiSpot desk today by following the link in the video description. And with that, back to the video.
So let's just go ahead and get started with the white, shall we? It wouldn't be an Elk video if I, of course, did not shout out Felia first, who appears in 60 of those 848 decks that I mentioned earlier. About 60, it's more like 59. The thing I love about Felia most is her ability to flicker any type of permanent, not just creatures, as well as her ability to be grabbed off of something like a Recruiter of the Guard or an Imperial Recruiter. Once you hit white-blue, it becomes a little bit more of a question of whether or not you want to play Felia over something like a Soul Herder, which can also, of course, get got off the Recruiter of the Guard. But in general, Felia will fill the role very nicely in a Boros deck or an Orzhov deck, where you don't necessarily have access to that blue mana to get the Soul Herder value engine online with the two iconic recruiters. Felia makes her home in a lot of different lists though, not just flicker decks, because like, for instance, in an Enchantress deck full to the brim with Constellation kind of cards, well, would you look at that? Felia lets you flicker your enchantments in play, getting not only the ETBs that they come with, but also triggering all of your Constellation effects. There's other stupid things you can do, like flickering dumb artifacts and stuff, like Portal to Phyrexia flickered with Felia is just stupid egregious. But like, chances are, if you have at least like, I would say maybe like a 7% density of ETB cards, Felia is going to be worth it in your deck, and you should really just be running her. Moving on to another flicker-based spell, I want to shout out Parting Gust. Parting Gust has been going into more and more of my decks over more generic options like Swords to Plowshares and stuff. Now, this isn't me saying Swords to Plowshares doesn't have a home. In fact, it does. Typically, any sort of deck where you have expensive threats that you want to deploy on your turn, it's really nice to have one of these like 1-mana interaction spells in particular. But for me, Parting Gust has that extra utility of being a protection spell and a flicker spell for not that much extra cost, it being 1 more mana. So generally for me, this one ends up sneaking in more than a Swords or another generic removal spell would. Speaking of another very good generic removal spell, Thraben Charm is certainly up there as one of my all-time goats now. The graveyard hate on this card is legitimately some of the stupidest interaction I've ever seen come out of a Modern Horizons set. If your board state is regularly chilling with like 2 or 3 creatures, this basically destroys about anything you want in terms of the creature removal mode. It lets you blow up enchantments, which is certainly a nice card type to hit, although, you know, it's not as good as, say, artifacts, I would say. But like I said, let me just drive home. The graveyard hate on this card is so stupid, and it makes it better in certain cases than even a generous gift would be. Typically what I've been doing is I've been going off onto Demolition Field as my land hate card of choice, and then Thraben Charm will be kicking around as the generous gift replacement in that kind of list. I typically just find that 3 mana for most decks, asterisks, please asterisks, for most decks is too slow. There's ward costs flying around now, like who's going to pay the extra 2 ward on Roaming Throne on top of the 3 to blow it up. And then on top of that, I typically find myself ending up blowing up a creature anyway with Generous Gift. So listen, I'm not going to say Generous Gift is a bad card. I'm just going to say that it is required that you have a lot more consideration when adding it to a deck than it once had. Okay, so I'm the Flicker boy, right? So we've talked about Flicker spells already, and we've talked about some generic white removal that I like running a lot now. I do want to shout out 2 cards that I basically put in every white deck that have broken containment of just being a Flicker target into literally being probably some of the best white cards I see in modern Commander decks. The first one of these is going to be Sand Scout, and as far as I'm aware, Sand Scout's actually picked up in price a little bit, so people have been recognizing how good of a card this is. But I really just need to drive home that despite the cheapest printing of this card being like $4, it's infinitely better than White of the Night Orchid or Loyal Warhound. Definitely Loyal Warhound. At least White of the Night Orchid can grab like dual lands and also like Mistveil Plains in like a Sunforger deck or something. But regardless, Sand Scout is busted. And the simple reason is that deserts are really good. That Sand Scout basically becomes a Swiss Army knife of options. So it's ramp. Right, White Ketchup Ramp is fine. What White Ketchup Ramp gets better with is bounce lands, because you get to go up a mana while not going up a land drop, so you can have it happen twice. Great news with Sand Scout, Arid Archway exists. That's a bounce land. So you can, on turn 3, basically all the time, because, you know, turn 2 doesn't quite work out for Sand Scout and stuff, because everyone has 2 lands unless there's a rampant growth that got thrown around. But anyway, long story short, turn 3, Sand Scout, Arid Archway, bounce one of your land drops back to hand, play a land drop for turn. Also, if you were missing your land drop that turn, Sand Scout fixes that, because you can, on turn 3, play the Sand Scout, bounce one of your lands with the Arid Archway, replay the land you bounce. So it gives you an extra turn of treading water before you miss a land drop. Also, there's all the dual crime deserts. Those are great for fixing. You also have access to Cactus Preserve, which is another fixing type land that can also be a bit of a beatdown if you have like a giant mana value commander. Moving on, we have untapped deserts for Sand Scout. Each one has a monocolored untapped land, so it's not even that big of a tax to include those in your mana base. And then we start to get a little bit quirky. We have Scavenger Grounds, which is graveyard hate. And we also have Lazotep Quarry, which is recursion and also a sack outlet. So now if you're a white-black deck that has like a nice mid-range plan with a sacrifice theme, Sand Scout is a sack outlet that ramps you and comes with a creature that is fodder. And also whenever you happen to discard a land or it ends up in the graveyard some way else, gets milled to like a Stitcher Supplier or something, you make creature tokens. That's not from the graveyard to the battlefield on Sand Scout. That's from the graveyard from anywhere on Sand Scout. So if any land card goes into your graveyard for any reason, you'll get some Sand Warriors they can then sack. It's literally just such a busted, broken card. And it's to the point where, like, I legitimately think this is, like, an insane option, even sometimes in green decks, where maybe you have, like, a desert-y kind of theme, you're a Selesnya or Abzan deck with, like, a sacrifice theme, and you really like Lazotep Quarry. Instead of running, like, rampant growth and, like, stuff, you run, like, Secure Tribe Elder and Sand Scout, and then those are your ramp options of choice. You just keep a kind of low curve. The fact that you can consider this card in green decks is really just, like, driving home how broken Sand Scout is. Please run this card. Anyway, that's enough glazing Sand Scout. Let's move on to Lorn of the Third Path. Now, I know what your first inkling is. Lorn of the Third Path is a very, very good card just as a removal spell. It is a Reclamation Sage that's legendary, so you can get it with white legendary tutors. You can do all this flicker shenanigans with it. But legitimately, we're going to talk a little bit more about Lorn's activated ability right now. And it partially has to do with a second card that I end up recommending for a lot of decks, and that's Solitary Confinement. Solitary Confinement is like if Ghostly Prison was good. Now, by no means is this card free to run. It requires you to have a lot of card advantage being generated, and that can be from Monarchy, from even Phyrexian Arena or something like that. But the main joke is if you are building a Pillow Fort deck of any sort and you are able to get 2 or 3 cards a turn, then Solitary Confinement turns into such an insane time-making engine. And here we have Lauren contributing to that, right? Lauren can just accidentally draw you an extra card every turn while also being removal. And then all of a sudden, you're like only 1 more card a turn away from making Solitary Confinement into a stupid lockout piece. Really, I am begging you not to sleep on this card, especially if you care about discarding cards. It's a great discard outlet. 2, if you care about enchantments, it's a great way to make an Enchantress deck have enough time to survive forever. And when comboed with Sterling Grove, it gets really annoying. Personally, to me, I just feel like if you have a grindy enough deck where you're considering Ghostly Prison as like a way to buy time, you'll typically want these extra card advantage cards anyway, and in which case you should probably just be on Solitary Confinement instead, with a couple of ways to tutor up and find it, like Perplex or whatever in an Esper deck. Anyway, that's enough about white. It's time we move into blue. The first thing I want to shout out, just like a very clean inclusion in any blue deck, is Lorien Revealed. Lorien Revealed is disgusting. It's a tap land, essentially, because you just pay 1 mana and you get a new land. 2, it just draws you a bunch of cards in the late game. And 3, let's talk about pitch spells. This is a blue card that is also a land, meaning your pitch spells like Commandeer, for instance, get a lot better with Lorien Revealed in the deck. Super versatile, broken card. This one is not a sleeper. However, I just do not see it in a lot of decks anyway. Let me just say it is worth the $2.50 or $3, however much this card is worth, to put this in your blue decks. Anyway, let's talk about a second land now, that being Teleria West. Teleria West is one of these lands that you don't realize how insane it is until you've played a few decks that need it, and in which case it becomes some of the most broken Magic you've ever played. Let's start with the simple thing. Teleria West is, for 3 mana, tutor any land you want, because Transmute lets you get a 0-drop. Hooray. You can get something like Sunken Citadel off of this, which is a really broken card. Is it Sunken Palace? It's Sunken Palace, one of those 2 sunken lands. Not the one that is a Soul Ring that like taps for 2 mana for land activated abilities. The one that lets you activate it, it makes a blue mana, and then when you use that blue mana for something, you then copy that something. That one. I think it's Sunken Palace is the correct one. That card's really good to tutor up with Teleria West. Another card I really like to get with Teleria West, Bazooka Bog. Now it's Grave Hate. Hooray. Third thing I like with Teleria West, if you are a Proliferate deck and you are not already on Astral Cornucopia or on Everflowing Chalice, great news. Teleria West grabs either of these things, and eventually, I think after like 2 turns of proliferating, they practically become Omniscience. They just generate so much absurd amounts of mana that you might as well just be infinite mana. And then also Teleria West can grab you some sillier stuff. Something in the vein of Zurin Orb, or something like Inevitable Betrayal, right? You just have all these silly 0 mana value cards that do something, like they punch way up above their weight. Walking Ballista is another example of this. Teleria West is broken. It's just such a good card. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about Step Through now. This is the first card I'm going to recommend that's a little bit more niche. Isn't quite as broadly applicable as some of these other things, but it's still very, very strong. For starters, a lot of creatures in blue are just wizards by accident, and if any of those wizards by accident, like Archaeomancer, happen to return an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, you can then do this again. And oh my goodness, would you look at that, you can get Spellseeker after that second one. Oh, what does Spellseeker get? Ephemerate. And now you can just go back and forth ephemerating the Spellseeker, and then ephemerating the Archaeomancer, and then ephemerating the Spellseeker, or just keep ephemerating the Archaeomancer, and you can just like basically search your entire deck for whatever you want. If your deck is in any % way built around tiny spells, where like 1 or 2 of these like 2 mana value spells are super important, I would quite legitimately call this non-negotiable to your deck's game plan. Examples include Doppelgang, Aggressive Biomancy, Pull from Tomorrow, as basically a lot of X spells. There's other things too. Like if you're doing all this like ephemerating and stuff, you're probably going to be in the mood for like a 3 steps ahead, which can create a token copy, but also be a counter spell. You also have access to something like Final Showdown, which is a board wipe and also a protection spell. So there's just like so many mechanics where it's like cheap card, but then it has like an expensive mode that you can get. And if it's an instant or sorcery that you like in your deck, then this is just an insane engine to make your deck the most consistent thing on the planet. And as it turns out, a lot of blue decks really like instants or sorceries that are cheap, so it ends up in a lot of the decks I end up looking at on stream. So don't sleep on these cards. This is one of the more expensive ones that I'm talking about today, but like, oh my god, is it expensive for a reason. This is like legitimately so broken strong. One of these cheaper cards I want to mention and give a shout out to, another kind of niche card as well, is Portent of Calamity. It is so easy to accidentally free cast Eldrazi off of this thing because Brainstorm and Brain Surge are already just good cards, and those let you top deck manipulate. So, oh, this giant Eldrazi stuck in my hand, put it on top. What's next? You then Portent of Calamity X equals like 4 or something, and then you hit like different type, the Eldrazi you put on top, and then you get to cast it for free. And then the more mana you put into it beyond that, like let's say you paid 6 mana, that's 5 looks. And that lets you have a little redundancy, right? You're allowed to whiff and hit one type twice by accident. Overall, just super absurd card. Anyway, let's move on to black now. I first want to mention Unearth. Unearth is a card that I used to run all the time when I first started playing Commander. Oh, my Commander's 3 mana value. Great. If it ever gets blown up, I have this 1 mana value card that I can then pay 2 to cycle instead if my commander never gets blown up, right? I have an IRA deck kicking around. It used to be in there a long time ago. Here's the thing about IRA, it's a tokens deck. And here's the thing about Unearth, you can only use it once. Now, when we introduce Chthonian Nightmare into this conversation, it becomes very clear what I'm about to say. Chthonian Nightmare is annoying as hell. Because if you have any fodder laying around and a 3 mana value card you care a lot about, like Mayhem Devil, like a lot of aristocrat commanders like Sephiroth, you are able to then trade any creature you want for 2 mana for your commander back into play. Like, I think a lot of people get thrown off because of the energy on this card. This is not an energy card. If it said it gives you 3 grave points, I think this would literally see play in like 10%, 15% of commander decks instead, if it didn't say energy on it. The card's ridiculous, and any low curve black deck that has consistent fodder and sacrificing, I'm not going to say needs it, but it's damn well close to needs it. Moving on. Speaking of, horrible flicker engines, we've literally talked about it for every color, and that's not going to change. We have good old Saw in Half here. Now, Saw in Half is one of these cards that is literally so much value in a single piece of cardboard that it makes me legitimately ill. You have the broken EDH line, so my chat tells me, of Hoarding Broodlord. Hoarding Broodlord lets you tutor up Saw in Half, and then you convoke it out, Saw in Half, the Hoarding Broodlord. This is really broken in any Golgari deck or any other like white-black deck that goes wide, so it makes the convoke of the Hoarding Broodlord super easy, and then the convoke of the Saw in Half very easy, and then you get 2 cards that you can then, if one of those, like, you get the picture. You get to get a lot of advantage. And in fact, this feels like the perfect segue into my next black card I love to mention all the time. It's Grim Servant. Grim Servant I literally put in decks that aren't even mono black. Like, this is a devotion card, sure, but think of how many broken 1 mana value cards an average commander deck runs. Stuff like Skull Clamp and whatever. Like, your devotion to black doesn't need to be more than 1, especially if you're a Reanimator deck and run Entomb and Reanimate. Like, this guy gets either. Phyrexian Delver is a perfectly playable card, and the fact that this is either Phyrexian Delver or Vile Entomber, your choice when you cast it, is absurd. If you find you've built a deck rotating around 1 mana value thing, whether that be, of course, the aforementioned Skull Clamp, Amulet of Vigor, whatever, this is certainly worth a look as a card for that deck. Let's look at the opposite direction now, though. If you are a high mana value deck built around huge cards instead of a small mana value deck, I would almost always put Keen Duelist as well as Parker Luck, both are kind of very similar cards, in your deck. They both just give you advantage. They're both political and very funny. It's so hilarious when you like flip a 4-drop off the top of your library and they flip a land, and the next turn you flip like an 8-drop and they flip like a 2-drop. And it's just ridiculous how the card advantage is married with the accelerating the game forward. I feel like this is something that happens to a lot of people. They get into like a slog kind of commander night where literally nothing's happening forever. Keen Duelist is not only card advantage, but it's also putting a little bit of pressure on the pedal and making the game move forward, whether you like it or not. And honestly, I think I just really appreciate a card like this that has like a downside you have to mitigate, as well as a deck building hoop. It makes Keen Duelist a very interesting card, and it's also just a way more budget option than the typical Palantir of Orthonk you'll see in these large mana value decks. Definitely give Keen Duelist a shot. Talking about red now. The first recommendation I tend to put in a lot of decks is Virtue of Courage. It's a lot of specific decks. It's specifically decks that run a lot of storm cards. So stuff like Gutter Snipe and Rituals, where if you have a Gutter Snipe effect, right, something that pings each opponent whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and then you have a load of 0-drop non-creature spells or things that go positive like Rituals, suddenly Virtue of Courage is a non-deterministic storm card where you are able to cast a ritual, go up 1 mana, exile the top 6 cards of your library with the help of Gutter Snipe, cast another ritual from those top 6. Oh, would you look at that? I hit another ritual in my storm deck. Oh, would you look at that? I hit Past in Flames, so now I can start casting these things again from my graveyard, right? And it just gets so out of hand so quickly. And that's not all, because here's the thing. Virtue of Courage is actually just so strong it doesn't even need to be in storm decks. It is a shock, right? That's its baseline. You can just like shoot a Hate Bearer like an Aethersworn Canonist off the board. 2 mana for a shock is not that good. But when you then get the late game potential of, okay, I'll cast this, and now my Perforos deck draws like 20 cards every time I move to the combat step and make a bunch of goblins. Like, that's not nothing. And it can lead to a very nice sort of plan B for a lot of these Impact Tremor style decks, where if you do not draw the oops, I make 50 goblins card, you are able to make a couple goblins every turn and then draw 6 cards for each of them because Perforos triggers or whatever, right? Like, this card is pretty busted for those kinds of lists, especially since the floor is so high with the Adventure 2 mana deal 2. Definitely keep your eye on this card, especially since it's relatively cheap. I've already glazed this card so hard in my board wipe review, but I feel like it just needs to be hammered home. Mizzium Mortars, if you are a deck that does any amount of attacking to win the game, like I mean any amount, like if your deck is like, I would say 20% combat focused, Mizzium Mortars is going to serve you so well in a red deck because it is 2 mana, kill something. Like 4 damage is a very good breakpoint to be at. Would I have preferred it to be 5? Yes, of course, but we can't have everything. But 4 damage is a lot of damage for a creature, that it gets most like annoying things like Drannith Magistrate and stuff off the board in the early game. And then in the late game, it's 6 mana. Cute that you have all those 1/1s, dude, but you can't block with them now because they're gone. And then you just run someone over with combat. It's such a versatile and flexible card. And I think people really discount it because it's just not like as like a total wipe as something like a Blasphemous Act would be. But the whole point here is that it fills a very different role than a Blasphemous Act. It serves to clear blockers for a lethal swing, which it does quite literally better than no other card other than like Winds of Abandon or Cyclonic Rift. So enjoy that one, Ishin players and Arabella players and all you other freaks of nature out there. Lastly for red, sticking with the combat theme, we got to talk about Fear of Missing Out. Fear of Missing Out is one of these cards that makes me legitimately question my sanity. Like, I don't know how this card got made, but I'm so happy that it did. For starters, if you have any beginning of combat trigger, whether that be Nexus of Becoming, God Pharaoh's Gift, something like an Ishin deck, which is just full of attack triggers, whenever you attack with one or more creatures, like explode the board, right? Any one of these effects, FOMO just for 2 mana lets you rebuy those again. And it's only a 1-2 mana investment. You play it on turn 2, and then maybe in a couple turns it takes to get Delirium, you've set up all of your attack trigger synergy, and then you just get to swing with FOMO and just start harvesting insane value. Okay, thank God the car alarm stopped. I didn't realize that until it was too late. Which is fine, because we're going to be wrapping up the video here soon anyway. We have 2 green cards that go together. Malevolent Rumble, which is literally 2 mana impulse for green. And it's not even 2 mana, because you get a 1 mana rebate off the Eldrazi spawn. This fills up the graveyard so well. The number of times I've cast this and just like instantly hit Delirium on accident is literally so insane, which is super important for a card like Traverse the Uvenwald. Just to give you a reference of how often these cards go together, Malevolent Rumble's in 58 deck lists that I've reviewed, and Traverse the Uvenwald is in 59. They basically go into the same deck every single time. If your deck has an important creature, and you are a green deck, keep in mind, so you do have an important creature, this is just the perfect way to mitigate Flood and Screw, because Traverse is a land and also the best creature in your deck and also the best land in your deck. And Malevolent Rumble cycles for a land or cycles for an important permanent card that's a spell. By just including these 2 cards in just about any green deck, you have increased your consistency by so much. And if you're one of these creature decks that has like a ton of creatures and like no other card types at all, then I'd maybe recommend an Analyze the Pollen instead of a Traverse the Uvenwald. But still, same vibe, same idea. These 2 cards are giga busted. just super dumb. And they basically go in every green deck I've ever built. I don't end up actually recommending a lot of multicolored cards all that much because, one, they're just rarer, right? It's more likely that you're going to have a bunch of monocolored cards even going into multicolored decks than one specific multicolored card. But one that I literally just cannot stay away from is Perplex. Perplex is a counterspell that's kind of a soft counterspell. You ask the question, do you want your hand or do you want the spell to resolve? And you can do a lot of funny things with that where you have a second counterspell. So you perplex them first, they discard their hand, and then you actually counter their spell. But besides this fun play pattern stuff with Perplex, which is just like, in my opinion, a solid like C+ tier card, totally fine with having it. I'm never quite sad. It quickly becomes an A card when you realize that there's just so many important 3-drops in Magic the Gathering now. I mentioned Solitary Confinement earlier. That's one of them that this can get. But how many of you at home would have paid 6 mana for a Toxic Deluge during a game? Like, if you could pay 6 mana to put Toxic Deluge in your hand and then cast it, would you do that? And I think the answer is yes. There's a lot of board states where it's just like, I really need a board wipe, and 6 mana Toxic Deluge is what saves the day here. But even beyond that, there's just a slew of synergy cards like, say, Spelunking, for instance, for a lands deck. Or like the aforementioned Palantir of Orthonk or Parker Luck for a large mana value deck. Or Buried Alive for a Reanimator deck, right? There's just so many broken cards at 3 mana value that just turn your game plan from a hum to a whir to a explosive nuclear bomb. Perplex gets all of them. It's insane. I just love cards that increase the consistency of the deck by a ton. This is one of them. Hooray. Anyway, that does it. I just kind of wanted to put like all of the cards that I end up recommending an absurd amount for people into one video, just one cache. There's a good chance I've mentioned these in other videos before, but I feel like this is a really important video to make, just to say, hey guys, listen, these are the cards I find a lot of success with. Like, they make my game plans a lot more consistent. They're the kind of glue that keeps the Elk decks together. And yeah, let me know down in the comments below what cards you think I actually end up recommending a lot if I missed any of these. Do you have any staples that you end up putting in a lot of your decks? Let me know down in the comments below, and until next time,